Dave Hamburg and I knew a guy at the Ford Foundation named Gordon Harrison. And my recollection is that he and I shared weird common interests. One was in malaria, another was in military history. Anyway, in around 1970, the big foundations discovered there was a thing called the environment, and I can remember talking to Gordon about it and saying, look, he wanted to give money, the foundations wanted to give money to help with the environment. And I said, this is not a situation where dumping money in is going to do a lot of good, because you got to train people first to be able to deal with these issues. We don't have, if every ecologist, if you had 10 times as much money, it couldn't be spent well. So you got to train people. And he came out here and talked to me and to Dave, and I don't remember the sequence anymore, but we came up with the idea of having a human biology. The original challenge was getting organized, like it always is. Of course, as soon as a couple $1 million showed up on Stanford campus, the professional money spenders appeared. The people we could never get to cooperate on anything beforehand came out of the woodwork. But we were able to recruit some of the best people on campus, like Sandy Dornbush and Don Kennedy, basically immediately into the program, and others. I'm not remembering their names now. And the basic idea was to have a biology sequence and a behavioral sciences sequence. In those days, I can't say what everybody else was thinking about. I think Don and I, at least, were thinking very hard about sort of changing the structure and focus of the university so it was more effective at dealing with the clear problems of the way the natural sciences interact with what you might call the policy sciences and so on. And that is something that Stanford has been, despite its antique structure, very successful at. It was here, for instance, that the first big collaboration of ecologists and economists took place. And to this day, I still do research with the chair of economics, with Larry Goulder, and so does Gretchen Daly, who's in biology and so on. So we have managed to bridge those gaps. We have the Woods Institute now. We have the Human Biology program, which bridged those gaps. I mean, I got to work with Sandy Dornbush and Hrant Kachadurian and Don Lundy, and a lot of people worked together and talked together that hadn't previously in the university. For instance, the work that we did on Jasper Ridge on butterfly populations turned out to have a lot of pertinence to the managing of the Peruvian anchovita fishery. And of course, population dynamics is one of the crucial issues in the whole environmental problem. And in a human biology program, you can teach both about butterflies and about people and show how the mathematics applies in similar ways to both, and the principles apply to both. Well, when you look at population problems with human beings, you have the problem, which you bring an economist in on the allocation of scarce resources. How do the resources get scarce? Because the population grows beyond the capacity of the environment to provide the resources to everyone in abundance. And so it fits right in. The butterflies eat up their food plants. The human beings eat up their food plants, and the consequences of both are very similar. When we were thinking about the population situation 40 years ago, we were focused very much on food supplies because there were famines going on then. And of course, the famines have continued. When the population bomb was written, there were about 500 million people hungry. Now there are about 1 billion people hungry. But what we didn't know at the time of the population bomb was that we were losing biodiversity at a horrendous rate, at a rate far beyond that of the background rate in the history of life. We didn't know that the ozone layer was going to become a problem. We knew that we were going to be changing the climate, but we didn't know in what direction. And subsequently, we've learned that there was another half to the greenhouse forcing, and it's going to be towards warming. We didn't know the level of toxics around the planet, and hadn't even begun to think about the problem of hormone mimics. We didn't realize the work hadn't been done on nuclear war, so we didn't realize just exactly how bad a nuclear war would be, particularly a small nuclear war, which we now know would end our civilization. So there were a whole series of things in which we were much too optimistic back then, but of course we've learned a lot since then, and that's helped cure our optimism. The problem that the human biology program faces, and that we all face, is that human behavior is not reacting to what science knows. In other words, it's virtually impossible to increase the price of gasoline with a tax that's 2 cents a gallon when the tax ought to be $2 a gallon and growing. And that's why the community, the scholarly community in particular here at Stanford, is starting to organize a thing called the Millennium Assessment of Human Behavior, which is trying to get the discussion around to the really big issues, the ways in which the values of science and the values of technology lead to imperatives that take us down the drain. And so the issue is really fully in the realm of the social sciences, the academic issue, and the humanities. How can the message be changed? We have proven that telling people what the science tells us does not lead to behavioral change. And so that's why we need people in the humanities, for instance, to help develop narratives that will convince people. That's why we need artists involved. One of the biggest changes in the environmental area was that single, very artistic picture of Earth taken from outer space, which changed a lot of people's thinking about the environment. And so the Millennium Assessment of Human Behavior, I think, is maybe our last chance, and it's not clear that it's going to work. The original idea, Ann and I put in a book in around 2001 or 2002, and then Don Kennedy and I wrote an article about it and published it in Science. And it has had the effect of recruiting an awful lot of social scientists into the battle to try and prevent a collapse of civilization. But there's still a small minority of social scientists, most of whom are working on important problems, but problems that are trivial compared to the overall environmental problems. Typically, for example, in the population area, attention was shifted very strongly in the 1990s towards reproductive health and women's rights, both of which are extremely important, but both of which will be totally trivial, of course, if we allow civilization to collapse because we have vast famines and wars over water and so on. It's now becoming more and more clear that if you want to remain at the front lines of science, you got to change disciplines fairly frequently. Otherwise, you end up defending your old ideas rather than getting new ones. But we're social animals. And one of the huge advantages I've had, for example, is that I know Don Kennedy. So I don't have to learn everything about neurophysiology, because if something comes up in neurophysiology that seems weird to me, I can call Don up and ask him, or I can go downstairs and find myself another colleague. One of the great advantages of being at Stanford is that I've known Charlie Yanofsky, one of the world's greatest molecular biologists, for 52 years, and he's been extremely helpful to me, trying to explain and discussing with me issues in evolution that I couldn't tackle alone. I think the human biology program is one of the truly great innovations in academia. We need more innovations in academia. We don't lead enough. But certainly Stanford was leading with the human biology program. But my hope for the human biology program was that we would begin training a bunch of people who were not so heavily siloed, were not so cornered in one of the ancient Aristotelian disciplines. And I think we've been a huge success from that point of view. There are a whole bunch of people educated who have to know something about the social sciences as well as the natural sciences, and that's extremely important, and it's relatively rare. For example, if every economist in the world had been an undergraduate in the human biology program at Stanford, then the world would be nothing like the mess we have now. Remember, most economists, not all, but most economists think the economy can grow forever. If they'd been in the human biology program, they'd understand that's not possible. That alone would change the entire, cultural aspect of the people who are running the world. One of the nice things about having been a teacher at Stanford is that what look to me as middle-aged people, and some even elderly people, come up to me and say, I was in your population biology class in the human biology program back in 1973 or something like that. And they often say that what they learned in human biology changed their entire way of looking at the world, changed what careers they went into, changed how many children they had. I get that a lot. So there's no question. I certainly feel that the human biology program has had a gigantic impact on a lot of people, and a lot of people who've turned out to be in relatively influential positions. Unfortunately, though, we haven't been able to train enough. It's too bad that the kind of content we have in human biology, first of all, much of it should be taught in high school, long before you get to college. If we had an education system in this country, it would be. But Stanford does play catch up there and educate a lot of people. I think it's by far the most important major in the universities. After all, one of the main purposes of the university is not just to create knowledge, but to see it's passed on to smart people.